Hey everybody, I'm here today with Sean Doherty, co-founder of SUDA, Substance Use Disorder Anonymous. It's a new addiction program like AA or NA where the focus isn't just on abstinence, it's on abstaining from the problem substance a person's struggling with. It's more accepting of the use of other substances. We live in an age where marijuana is legal here in Massachusetts. Some people with opioid use disorder will continue to drink and use marijuana. So this program is non-judgmental and more supportive and accepting around people's substance use, even when they have certain addictions that they want to work on and get away from. So that's the best I can explain it. I'm going to let Sean explain more because he's the co-founder of SUDA. All right, there you are, my friend.
All right. So yeah, a quick intro, I guess. So what SUDA is we felt there was a need for a fellowship in this day and age that did not set a standard that you had to be completely abstinent before you could be in recovery. We wanted to acknowledge people's progress and change in their lives and base it more on quality of life, because I think when you view recovery and abstinence as a whole, it does work extremely well, but it works only for a very few people percentage-wise that have substance use disorder. So we view recovery and abstinence and substance use disorder as all like presenting in a spectrum that's unique to each individual. So basically, you know, how we define your recovery is that you set a healthy boundary for what you want to do. Say you're using A, B, C, and D, 4 different drugs, and A and B are causing you the most issues, then you would just abstain from A and B and allow yourself to have a healthy boundary and continue using C and D. And we don't, view any substances as any different, to us, whether it be caffeine or fentanyl, it's all substances that need to be managed. Even caffeine does have Caffeine Anonymous, and that's a drug that can be abused. All drugs can be abused. So I think when we view everything in that light, that everything presents as a spectrum, different for everyone, then recovery is different for everyone. And for myself, after having done complete abstinence-based recovery for more than 20 years, the reality is I wasn't abstinent-based. I had used different substances. I used prescribed medications. I used caffeine. I used nicotine for the first few years. So, the reality is most people with substance use disorder are going to use some form of substance, and maybe it's time that there's a space where people work on defining what their healthy boundaries are with substances, because they're a part of our culture and our world.
So for the people out there, I have an idea of this stuff, but why is it now more than ever unrealistic for a lot of people with substance use disorder to just be abstinent? What is it because you picked this is good timing, you knew that it was time for something like this. Why is that?
Well, I think really it's the overdose epidemic. I think is, for myself, in the era that I used, heroin is fairly safe. They don't even have heroin anymore.
No heroin. So when you say no heroin, what do they got out there?
Fentanyl.
Okay.
And then they mix it with other things, sedatives, hypnotics. Xylazine is the big one that they're mixing it with now. Ketamine can also be in there. So it's a much more dangerous drug supply, and they're doing different things. They're pressing pills to make them look like benzodiazepines, which were normally fairly safe drugs. I think the reality is that most people were never all in for abstinence-based therapy as the only treatment for substance use disorder. First, because both of the primary fellowships don't even view what they're treating with their fellowships as even per se like addiction. They actually consider alcoholism to be its own separate disease, and
like an AA and NA.
Correct, and you know, and so there's this culture there that they don't even recognize that this is a mental illness that can present this way. The reason abstinence is pushed is because there's this concept that, you know, I have an allergy to substances. If I take one, it's going to take more, and it's going to just keep taking. And, you know, and basically, if that's your answer for everything, then of course that's the only answer you'll ever find.
Yeah, as if like you get an addiction to one thing, then you're just going to get addicted to all the things.
Correct. And that's not true. I mean, really, when you look at substance use disorder, most people find their own recovery by other means. I don't think most people, you know, that have a problem for a period, a lot of them, they end up reining it in. They use marijuana, they use, you know, even socially accepted drugs, you know, medications. You know, all these are very legitimate things as long as a person's functioning. I mean, that's the reality is, you know, people love substances, and you're going to have addiction, and addiction is the most severe form of substance use disorder. And, you know, everything else should just be viewed on functionality. Because for myself, what I've seen is having these very strict white and black ways of looking at things. Even when you succeed, the failure is just aggravated by how long you're throwing away, or
your amount of good time.
You know, like, because
clean time and
one of the
sober
things,
time.
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed, and NA even, you know, points it out in their literature, that recovery is not abstinence. But I think just because of cultural hierarchies and the way all fellowships and clubs kind of develop, and they'll always develop hierarchies and sort of scapegoating of each other and leveling of things, I feel like that both of those programs, that's all they care about. That's all that's celebrated is your clean time and your sobriety. That's what every gauge is. Happiness isn't a gauge for anything in those fellowships. That's why they have terms like dry drunk, and, you know, it's just like I said, if that's your answer for everything and that's the only answer, then, you know, it's okay if you're miserable for the next 50 years, as long as you don't use, if that's your gauge for success, and that's fine. But I don't think a lot of people feel that way, and that's why the recidivism and relapse is such a predominant thing. And that's another little thing is, in SUDA, we didn't want that kind of concept of failure to be projected by other people, so we've kind of gotten rid of relapse as a concept, and rather we do still have it, but it's person-centered. You only relapse if you say you relapse. If you feel you need to start over and you want to call what you did of, you know, using a substance that was on your bottom line, or we call it healthy boundary. I'll use bottom line because that is a more common term that's used in like SLAA or OA or the other fellowships that are based on not complete abstinence of something. And I think one of the reasons that abstinence has become the predominant indicator of recovery in our culture is because that's also what society wants. They don't want addicts or people lying around, and I shouldn't even use term addicts like that. You know, these are people with addiction, people with substance use disorder. But, you know, because these fellowships have been the only success acknowledged, you know, it's a two-way street, because that's what society really wants, is for people to not use drugs. You know, or at least not use the ones they think they shouldn't be using. And but everything that we've seen in the world especially shows that you can create death penalties around using substances and people are still going to get high. It's
the whole like the whole war on drugs and stuff.
correct.
Yeah, I was a victim of that, of my own choosing. Sadly, I
Me
struggled
too.
with it. So tell me more about like your history. I want to move this because the cars keep coming by. Let's just get rid of some of that background noise.
Okay.
I'm gonna pull this couch over. Yeah, just leave it in. It's not good. It's just a 2-second thing.
Oh, this is.
Whoopsies.
Now I feel like I'm in the woods.
You know what I mean? Like we're gonna be a little bit of background noise. Get Sean over here.
Yeah.
A little bit of. Got these cars going by. We're out here in Beverly, Mass. Here.
Yeah.
Over at Nero. All right. So tell me about your history and like how you came to this point and like what what your experience was.
Okay, and I'll just rail right through this. I grew up in Lynn, Mass, in a family that, there was a lot of addiction, and so I fell right into it, and I started doing drugs. If you want to say nicotine, I started smoking. I was 11 years old. I probably started with weed around 13, 14, and by 18. I was a daily, actually right from the start, I was a daily marijuana user, but it progressed right through a lot of different things, psychedelics and into benzodiazepines especially. There was a lot of them on the streets in the 80s.
Like Xanax and Klonopins
Yeah,
and
that's
stuff
Xanax,
like that.
Klonopins, all that stuff, Halcyon back in the day. So that became my thing in high school pretty much. Was benzodiazepines. There were a ton of them around. People were stealing them, and a little bit of cocaine use, especially in the 80s. And once I got out of high school, I did start using a lot more cocaine, and I went into my first detox/psych unit because I ate a bunch of pills after doing cocaine all week, and I woke up in a psych unit, and that was my first treatment. That's where I was exposed to AA and NA, and for me, it really wasn't an option at that. I was into, I was an 18-year-old punk rock kid from Lynn, and all I heard was the teacher from Charlie Brown, like womp 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 womp, God, womp 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 womp, God, pray, God, pray.
You felt like like the religion was being pushed on you there?
Yes. So what I learned, that was not to take benzos, and I did poly addiction for a few years.
When you say poly addiction, what's that? Explain that.
So basically, my philosophy from say 18 to 22, 23 was as long as I didn't do one thing for a lot of days in a row, because physical addiction to benzodiazepines was rough. Even when I was 18, I still remember how bad that was. And, so I kind of backed off from that particular drug and just, I do everything, and,
Okay.
For that era, that would include cocaine, still taking occasional pills, both barbiturates were still around too. Those are my two favorite pharmaceuticals, was benzos and barbiturates, and that's not even like a thing anymore, I don't think. Seconal and Nebutol and Truanol.
Yeah, barbiturates. I always forget the name. Yeah, those aren't around as much.
And I think they stopped making them actually. So that era, I just kind of bounced around doing that stuff, and I was certainly not what I would consider today functional, but I held down a job the entire time, and had some apartments, lived, it really wasn't a bad time all in all when I look back at how bad life can be sometimes. And what happened there is, I guess in old school terms, would be progression. And I never worked on myself. I never did any therapy or anything like that. And eventually what came along was heroin. And
How did you get introduced to that drug?
just, it was there, and I did it.
All right.
Basically, a friend of mine started working on the Mass Pike, and there was a guy up there that did it. And, a couple of friends of mine tried it, and I tried it. It was like the early 90s, and things were sort of transitioning from like cocaine and the crack epidemic, and it was kind of grunge era, and I think heroin was having a little bit of a resurgence, and this whole time
Kurt Cobain brought it back.
but to be honest, I had read Junkie. I was very much a drug culture person.
Yeah.
So the only reason I probably hadn't tried heroin up until that point is just it wasn't available in any sort of safe way.
Yeah.
And so once it became available, I started doing it, and me and my friends, we were like the people that were gonna, do heroin on the weekends for the rest of our lives. That's how it was gonna pan out.
All right.
It certainly did not pan out that way. I got in a car accident, and I had been doing it that way actually for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Actually, I did.
Functioning heroin addict, like.
Well, I wasn't addicted to it. I did it like 1 or 2 days a week on the weekend.
All right.
And like I said, and I had that philosophy in my head of poly addiction. And the irony is one of these bands is a straight edge band too. So I love music, and I got in a car accident. I actually did get whiplash. I did get a lawsuit too from that, but
Okay.
pissed right through that. But anyway, so I got in an accident, and I had 2 Fugazi shows and 2 Boston shows in that week. So it was like a week that I was looking for. And I did heroin all 5 of those days and woke up sick. And
You copped a habit.
And that was my first habit, and that really brought about the next 8 years or so of once I got a habit, it wasn't long before I started IV drug use. That 7 or 8 years was just after the first year or two, I was basically unemployable for the most part. And
You were homeless too?
I was, I bounced around a lot, certainly couch surfing, but I did shelter things. I did prolonged shelter things, post detoxes. I did probably in my life 60 to 70 detoxes. I know when I worked at one of them.
How long was this period of time that you were out there active using the heroin?
About 8 straight years from 7 years of hard. I probably started with heroin around 92, and I remember those Boston shows were in 93.
Yeah.
And then by 95 was when it was really bad. So 6 really bad years, if I kind of really iron it out. And definitely after 95, I was pretty much in that loop of, and the reason I went to so many detoxes, I was using them as shelters too.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot, it wasn't like it is now. There were a lot of detox beds. It isn't like there were a lot of heroin addicts back then.
Yeah, now there is.
And, so I kind of used it as a shelter system. You could, because insurance was an issue. Eventually, though, what happened is...
Oh, like the treatment birds, like the frequent flyers, they go in there in the winter time, and then they're wrapping up on the halfway house like right around spring, and then they hit the street type of stuff.
I remember I worked with someone at the detox, and I made her feel really bad because she would always complain about, the frequent flies, their asses, entitled, and I said, I go, here's my birthday, put me in and see what happens. And I never heard her say that term ever again because the screen filled up. You know, it was like my local detox. I'd probably been there 25 or 30 times.
And you were working at this place.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
you were-
that's why they saw me after like 6 months, and they were like, "Come work for us. You got to come work for us." You know, I remember someone else told, like, it was like, "You forgot where you came from," and I said, "No." I said, "You know what? This isn't a jail. These people are here to help. Like, you need to treat them with respect." And you know what's funny is he tried to still call me on it, and I looked right over to the nurse and I said, "James, how was I every time I was here?" And he looked right at me and goes, "Sean was like the best. Not a peep out of him. He just played cards at the end of the hall." And
So what happened? Like you went through like all this 6-year hard period. What was the transition point? Like, how did you get away from the addiction?
I'll say I went to jail for a year. That wasn't fun, but that didn't end it either. I used for about a year after I got out of the jail, and I was in jail from 99 to 2001. I spent a year there, with one brief month on probation, and that place was worse than the jail, and they threw me right out and violated me. But
Yeah.
but what did happen is that last arrest, you know, it was a close call for a prolonged period of time. You know, like, if I had been in, you know, luckily I didn't have any money, and even though they were trying for these hard charges to railroad me into, you know, like, thankfully I didn't have any money or anything, so that I'm actually one of the very small percentage of people that got put in front of a grand jury and didn't get indicted.
Okay.
Because there
nice.
wasn't enough evidence for it. But they were talking like, you know, oh, maybe we can plea out to 3 in a day, because there was all these weird, like, you know, distribution charges and shit like that.
Yeah.
And 3 years, I'm like, 3 years? I just went to go get some heroin with someone. Like,
Yeah, you were just an addict. Yeah, I got you.
and but that still didn't do it. But what did happen is, I think, I did some therapy with a very good therapist, and
Do you want to give him a shout out here? Because I let you know. What I mean?
Sharon Day, I don't even know if she's still alive. She was a therapist at Longwood Treatment Center, which was a prison for alcohol and substance use.
Okay.
Which I had chose to go to because I was done.
And she influenced you, like.
You know what? She did something that really is still not done in treatment, and she was an excellent motivational interviewer, and she met you where you were at.
Okay.
Always. You know, so she just let you talk, and she knew how much I didn't like the fellowships, because they are pseudo-religious. That's not even anything objective to say that.
Yeah, and real quick, just so like people know and they can kind of like bookmark the motivational interviewing is a big thing in our field, and also meeting people where they're at. Like, these are like catchphrases that people will hear. So, all right, sorry to interrupt.
Yes, I wish they would practice more, but so, and she did some work on me, and I worked out some of my resentments, and I think that was enough to at least get me started where I got out. I didn't have any real defense or anything like that. I still cognitively, I remember having all the best intention when I, was getting out of jail, and I still remember so vividly. I was walking down the tier, I had my stuff, my mother was coming to get me, and this kid Kevin goes, "Do one for me," and that just flipped a switch in my brain, and I said, you know what, I am gonna get high tonight, and and it just kind of showed me. But I went to meetings, and that last year I used was just chipping and in and out of detox.
All right, so chipping, you use this before.
Chipping is basically using sporadically, trying not to get a habit.
Yeah, so just like a little bit here and there. Yeah. All right.
And eventually what happened was it was the most miserable year I ever used, because really I was done with it. And and I did, because that's all there was. There was none of this stuff, in 2000 even, like, as far as, it was all in its infancy, a lot of it, but, I was on the first needle exchange and stuff like that, but there was none of this. It was just, all you had was AA and NA.
Okay.
Those were your options.
Those were your choices. AA. So what?
Or I should say, I did have Plan B, and Plan B was I was going to go on the methadone clinic, find a nice, good doctor to put me on disability, and just sail into a death around 50.
Okay. All right. That's the Plan B.
Because that was my idea of what someone on the clinic did, because I had a very biased opinion from NA and from other heroin addicts.
And methadone, like, you can actively use when you're on methadone too. So it's like you can.
I never made it to a methadone clinic because I was so anti-methadone.
Yeah.
But, which is an irony. It probably could have saved me 5 years of misery.
Yeah.
Because I really did want to work and be a functional person. Like,
Yeah.
But, what did happen was, finally after that year of going back and forth, going to meetings, finally I went to one last detox, and to bring this in for a landing, as a atheist, and now I'm agnostic, I prayed, I did what they said. I didn't end up believing in God. I still don't really believe in like a God.
Yeah.
But what did happen is I made an act. I did an act, and that's surrender. For whatever reason, from that day on, all narcotics were completely off the table.
Okay.
And really all drugs were. But
you surrendered and you just went abstinent.
That's the only way I can explain it.
Were you in one of the programs at the time? Was it one of the...
I actually, having been a very institutionalized person, this time around, I left with probably the worst aftercare plan you could ever come up with, and I was in the detox, and I said, you know what? I called and begged my mother to take me back, give me a chance, and she did, and both my brothers sold drugs out of that house at the time, and so I was like going to a wet shelter, I guess. Not the best move.
Yeah, so you were triggered in there.
I wasn't, though.
But you weren't. You avoided the use.
They sold mostly weed and stuff. Those weren't my thing by that point.
So how did you get connected with like NA and stuff?
I'd always gone. I'd been forced to go, and this is one of the things that annoys me about treatment, and it still happens today.
Yeah.
Is even with as many different modalities as we have, they still basically farm out to AA and NA half their job.
Yeah, I do this. I love the groups because of the community and the support. It creates like a habit. People, you got to go. You go to your home group. Yeah, I agree. It's everyone. Yeah. So.
And and at the time, and this is why I started SUDA. At the time, it was a completely different time, and now is so much more complex.
Talk about those complexities.
So I think, I'm definitely a different generation that, I made these conscious decisions to do these drugs, and there are people that maybe necessarily didn't. They got into the oxy epidemic, they were prescribed meds. There's so many different avenues now than when I was young. The only avenue to get to heroin was drug culture.
Yeah.
That you're a part of an underground scene somewhere.
Yeah.
And and I think sort of the mainstreaming of some of the stuff, combined with just how much our culture has shifted, where it's just harder to live now. Not many people. I'm fortunate. I only have one job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I see so many people struggling, and those factors contribute to substance use.
Well, like stressors and things.
That's what I feel. For me, PTSD too was a huge part of it. And that's what I mean. Like,
and I think you were kind of keying in on the newer kind of disease model of like once you got an addiction, it's like you got. I was watching I hate to be silly, but I was watching South Park the other day.
Yeah.
And like it was Randy Marsh or somebody like who became alcoholic and he had a disease and he was in a wheelchair and was it Stan or whatever was getting him the beers, and so like I think you were kind of keying in on that. And to me, that actually, I will say this is,
if you've reached a far enough bottom, and maybe this is the biggest problem, is if you've reached a far enough bottom, that brain mechanism to say that I can't take one or it's going to start this all over again is helpful.
Okay.
And, and it was helpful for me, but only really when I really got into, Buddhism and beginning to start meditation and really finding my own path to how I was going to change my thought process around all that stuff, and how I was going to deal with the PTSD and the resentments, and there's like so many different factors that contribute to why people use drugs, and like there needs to be something that isn't white and black, and that's all this fellowship is
You're talking about NA.
No, I'm talking about SUDA now.
Oh, SUDA.
So our fellowship, there's no white or black because of that reason. Because
it's a gray area in the complexity.
Because everything's a gray area in substance use. Anyone that has substance use disorder, most people won't even transition into addiction. Because if you do this every day, you technically have a form of a substance use disorder.
I'm addicted to caffeine.
And the same goes for cigarettes or vape. I love getting a lecture about complete abstinence from someone who has a coffee in their hand while they're smoking a cigarette or vaping.
I just beat that one. I just beat the nicotine.
Yeah.
It's been 3 months now.
I'm 20 years away from nicotine.
So how long were you abstinent for?
So 20 years. And probably about 2.5 years ago, and I'm going to be fully honest, I was never 100% abstinent if you include coffee.
Okay.
I did have probably my closest to abstinence. Actually, the one period I was abstinent, I finished nursing school, and I said, you know what, I'm going to quit coffee. And I quit coffee, and my sleep didn't improve, my life didn't improve, and I said, you know what, I really like coffee. And about 3 months later, I started drinking it again.
Well, you got to give yourself some credit there, all right?
I did. So that's it. That 3 months in 2011 was the only time I was completely abstinent.
Okay.
From all drugs.
From all like addictive substances.
And I wasn't on any meds either at the time, because I have periodically taken SSRIs. And, just for myself, once I got married, I'm not sure if I can be in a, it's so funny, like I think it was Jack Kornfield said, it's easy to be a monk and live spiritually because you can just roll over and meditate.
Yeah.
You don't have to deal with anyone, except the other monks. And,
yeah.
So to me, like, I did that for a few years where I decided I wasn't going to be in any relationships or anything. And it was a very good period, but once I became in a relationship and I have to live with people and cope with people, that's hard.
That was stressing you out. So you were going to say like 2 years ago.
So I had gone on a SSRI.
Okay, so you got an antidepressant.
Once I got married, I was on that for about 5 years, maybe 4 or 5 years. And those worked fine, but I also, I like having joy in my life, and so I researched it because I had known people, and that were doing just fine using marijuana as an antidepressant.
Okay.
And so that's what I did. I started, taking low dose edibles, and then smoking here and there, and I started to taper off, and now, I am a daily user of marijuana.
Okay.
I don't, use it during the daytime for the most part, unless I got, so I'm basically just like a functioning, I guess.
Well, you're not going to have any withdrawals from marijuana unless maybe being a cranky bastard, you know what I mean?
Well, I don't even really get like that, because if that were the case, I'd be a cranky bastard at work, and I still get along fine.
Okay.
And I do stop periodically too, because I don't want to spend a lot of money, so
All right, so you got like little periods you want to save a little bit of, like, spending money. So like, so you found you were able to smoke the marijuana and come off of the SSRIs.
Yes.
Did you have withdrawals from the SSRIs, the antidepressants?
Definitely. I took my time with it. I've had bad experiences with some of those meds. Some of them working too much and altering my mental status. Some of them not working enough. One of them gave me a headache that wouldn't go away, and so I kind of knew what I was dealing with a little. So I did do it, tape it off as good as I can. I got some brain shocks. It wasn't too bad, and here I am, and I'm gonna go by what I've gone for the last 22 years.
Yeah.
Since May 13th, when I stopped doing narcotics, and that's my life is fine. And if it's not, I'll make some changes. That's really what it came down to. Is where I'm in this phase now. Is my stepdaughter was older. She graduated. Was getting ready to graduate. She's an excellent kid, but a lot of that turmoil was done, and I just wanted to be. It's weird. You take an antidepressant, and yeah, you're not very depressed, but you're also not very happy either sometimes.
It's like flatlining.
Yeah, and I'm a pretty happy person, and so I wanted to kind of get back to that, and that's kind of where I'm at. Like I can't, I can't complain at all.
Well, like it seems like you're an evolving person. Like you regardless of like the doctrine, you came into the abstinence and then like learning what works for you, and like regardless of whether that's accepted. So I have to commend you, and that's like one of the bigger stories, and it's going to be a big part because I'm going to be out there working in the streets. Well, like
I give you credit. I've seen stabbings and I've seen shit that I saw.
Well, I'm no kung fu master, but I'm gonna do what I can do to stay out the way and not be not get hurt. But the addictions are gonna be pretty severe, and it's gonna be a big part of what I'm doing. So like I guess my question in like the fascination, because I am gonna dig deeper into some of the other recovery support.
Well, we can
groups.
have a whole nother interview on my professional life and.
Well, mention what you do, like where
so
where
right
you're at now. I want you to just.
I'm kind of off the lines, but because we have no nurses, I've been working on a team. But
so you're a nurse. Now.
I'm a nurse, and I've worked in developmental disabilities and mental health and addiction. Those are my three.
Those are your specialties.
The things that I've done, yeah.
Okay.
And right now I'm working in psych rehab. I work for a DMH contract of Infant Corporation.
Okay.
And I'm their director of nursing. So right now, and this is what I mean, like how you can see this is just penetrating even deeper addiction.
Yeah.
And, like we're primarily DMH, and addiction's always been like an issue for us. But it's not been something where we're trying to a preventable death thing. Like,
yeah.
If we were to talk about, mental health as a whole, those risk factors are some of the same as addiction.
Yeah.
Loneliness is actually one of the biggest comorbidities there is in mental health. And the median age for someone with a DMH person is like in their mid-50s.
So the loneliness is a killer too.
Correct.
And like
so mental
that's,
illness.
I discussed that with a friend of mine, Kara, who's going to be coming on the scene at some point, and we're going to be discussing that a lot. It's like the loneliness that people feel. Even being surrounded by other people, you can still be lonely.
Oh yeah. And some of it, especially when I see how culture deals with this stuff, and this is why peer-to-peer recovery works so well, is that's the only connection people are allowed.
It's like the light and the darkness of loneliness.
Correct.
Loneliness in isolation is a fact, because, well, like an addiction is a relationship. It's like it models a human relationship, and
it's funny that you say that. When I look back, all I did when I got clean was I filed for divorce. on heroin and cocaine and benzodiazepines.
Yeah.
And I said, you guys aren't a solution for me anymore.
Yeah.
And the papers are filed. Because
Straight divorce, no more one night stands.
And trust me, you know, I went through quite a midlife crisis in my first few years.
Yeah.
There are plenty of behaviors to substitute for addiction. You know, that's another whole interview in itself.
Oh, yeah, right.
You know, yeah, and that's why I even talk about it and try and talk about it more honest terms and sort of the literature we've kind of started to develop, and it's a living document right now, and it's still developing.
Well, let's talk about the development of SUDA and what like motivated you. I want to get let's dig into that now. I want you to kind of share that.
So what really did it is, I've had a very successful life, and I've always gone to NA. I've wondered why I went as long as I did. I've always spoke up. I've always been a dissident. I've always spoke to, you don't have to believe in God. You don't have to, you know, if anyone's telling you, you know, you have to stop a medication, because I worked in addiction so long, I see how successful medications are.
Yeah.
You know, but there's a lot of stigma in NA. And, you know, I think being a dissident and having discussions with people was wonderful, and I've always sort of had this hope that eventually these fellowships were going to change their culture and kind of catch up with the times
And accept people maybe using things like marijuana or whatever.
I can only speak to, you know, I did a lot of research on AA, and they're probably actually a little more neutral than NA is. You know, my fellowship, NA, they actually make a distinction to say that, you know, if you're taking medication, you know, I don't even like using the term medication assisted treatment, because we don't call it insulin medication assisted treatment. It's medication.
Yes, yeah. Okay.
It's medication for SUD, and I'm working on trying to get away from that stigmatizing language, and I see how that type of advocacy works, because I've seen how it's worked to create equality with like the intellectual disability community and them advocating for themselves, and even with mental illness, and you know, being a part of NAMI and seeing like their
NAMI, a National
Association of Mental Illness,
yes,
and seeing how they take those stands against stigmatizing language, and really, you know, the point is to humanize it. That's why people, you know, I use abbreviations because I'm a nurse, but I was so happy to see like people, when we were developing the literature, said, no, you need to spell out substance use disorder every time. We can't have a human being be an acronym.
Yeah.
And you know, in that I use person with substance use disorder rather than just saying, you know, because what happens is, you know, addict. When you say that, even like that, where I was even semi-intentional, it has a connotation to it.
Yeah, like you're negative, like you're suffering from something you can't control,
and it's,
you know, you have no.
And it's dehumanizing 101.
Yeah.
If you want to take the humanity out of something, create a word that makes them not human.
Yeah.
And, you know, to me, addict has kind of turned into that word.
Well, I'm an overeater, and I wouldn't really appreciate everywhere I go if people call me an overeater.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't even want to be called that in a support group, you know? Like, it's a reality, but yeah, I get you.
So that, and then sort of like just that, you know, basic concept that it's not up to us to decide what someone's recovery is. It's that simple. Like,
it's their recovery.
It's their life, their recovery. And
so you're taking out the shame, you're taking out the humiliation, and you're trying to bring in more understanding and support, more self-directed.
Yeah.
Let them decide and figure out what's best for themselves.
Because, you know, and it's so weird to see, like, other people, you know, in NA doesn't even recognize substance use disorder. You know, they say they treat addiction. So to even see that, like, creating this like tier of, you know, my recovery is better than yours, you know, or my life's better than yours, when it should just be two peers, you know, meeting each other where they're at, whether the person has 40 years or, you know, or has nothing, you know, there should be some connection there, because, but I feel like
it's more of a humanistic approach. You know,
correct.
It's not
I feel like
hierarchical, like you said, of like, whereas like a badge of honor is avoiding certain like complete substance use, whereas like it's more humanistic, where you're taking into consideration each person's unique circumstance.
Yeah, because, you know, not everyone uses drugs for the same reasons. Not everyone has the same base of where they're coming from. There's a lot of people have 2 diagnoses, 3 diagnoses that are all different forms of mental illness. And, you know, it's just, I always get fascinated, I think, by just humanity's, like, and it's why conspiracies get so much traction, I guess, is we need one thing to fix this hugely complex problem.
Yeah.
You know, like, and it's just never gonna happen. And it's not realistic. I mean, you know, I jumped in on someone who recently had a relapse, and all I said was, don't beat yourself up over this. You know, the reality is most people are not going to be abstinent for the rest of their lives if they've chosen abstinence as their form of recovery.
Yeah.
And people were like really angry about that. Like,
was this while you were at an NA meeting?
This was on Facebook, but I was just curious to see how people react to even like the slightest challenge against what they've created as the solution for this complex problem.
You went against the doctrine, is what you're saying.
Right. When, no, maybe that person used because maybe they should have been on a medication to help with their depression, or help with their PTSD, or help with their anxiety, or help with whatever it was. Something that's nice and safe.
Was this, I might actually know who this is. Was this a young woman that's in NA?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I sent that individual a really nice message, and an inspirational message as well.
And to me, you know, it was another one of my best friends that answered underneath my little quote and was like, huh? Like it couldn't even register in their brain that I said something which is really a fact. Like, you know, I can tell you, I've been in these fellowships for 35 years now, from 17, 18 when I first got introduced to them by the courts. Very few people stay 100% abstinent for the rest of their lives. And I've heard, you know, and it's just rigid fundamentalism, and that's just really what it comes down to. They've become pseudo-religious sort of fundamentalist doctrination sort of.
Yeah, like anything else, like with the big book and all this other thing. So like, I think like, we've been going about 50 minutes now, so like, let's give like 10 minutes. I really want you to kind of share some of your experiences with SUDA, anything that you really want to kind of dig into. Shout outs, if you want any people you want to shout out.
Well, I shout out to all of the core people that have been keeping these 3 meetings going, and this is 3 months off the ground. We started June 2nd, was our first meeting, official meeting. We met a few weeks before, and you know, like, my focus has been, we've done a couple commitments, we have, you know, so we've gotten some new people too, is just to see how this would go, just, you know, because really, you know, what we did, my concept anyway, and I kind of wrote the base part of the literature, is just to go into this thing with no judgment, that it's completely wide open. You know, you can still use whatever substances you want, you can do reduced use, you can just come. and
Yeah.
just this idea that if you're connected, things can only get better. And in only 3 months, I can see we have two people that they're both actually achieved their own healthy boundaries of not using fentanyl anymore.
Wow.
So for me, that's better than, most. Actually, that's as good as I've seen NA do in the last 5-10 years.
And these were people that had probably had experiences with other
So
programs.
one goes to both fellowships. He actually came over. He's a friend of mine because I went to NA up until I started this. But he was someone that listened. Like I said, I've always been very outspoken against these biases and how they actually aren't part of the base literature, and we're supposed to be about non-judgment even in NA. But so he came over and he started doing this because he's not getting that connection, because it's one of the weird things, I guess, is, and this goes to both AA and NA, they put the thing you have to do perfect as the hardest thing to do before you can even start recovery in their fellowships.
Yeah.
And that's abstinence. There's no one in AA or NA that's going to work the steps with you if you're still doing fentanyl. You know what I mean? That's...
As if you're kind of like an outcast or persona
Correct.
non grata if you're still using actively while you're there.
Where here in us, I made everything so simple. I didn't, it's the whole book itself is, I think 44 by 6 pages, right now, or maybe 48 or something like that. So it's very simple, and that's everything. Like, that's the steps, traditions, because I just want people to be able to interpret it how they want to. Because I see in these other fellowships, just like with any sort of spiritual or religious thing, once it starts to get fundamentalized, the more you have, the more people can take out of context, use against other people, get on a soapbox and start, preaching about this is how this is going to work this way for you. Like, no one knows what's going to work for anyone. Like, and to me, when people do something, in these sort of sponsorship, and it's not of their own doing, it's not going to last. I feel.
So you're taking more of the humanistic approach of like the answer lies within each individual.
Correct.
Instead of somebody else pushing something on to somebody else and telling them what to do.
Like, our goal is to just be a connection, listen to people, let people talk. We're not doing any of this, for people that don't know, they'll tell you in A and NA, you're gonna sit down and shut up. There's none of that.
Yeah.
I want people to be able to talk, because I feel listening to someone is the greatest compassionate thing that any human can do for another human being, is to be there and be present and be actively listening.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of that connection that I want. And to me, to get that, you have to eliminate all this stuff of, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to, the only thing you have to do is just show up and want to find yourself,
So it's like you're asking people to look a little bit deeper into their behavior.
And if you find God, that's wonderful. If you don't find God, that's wonderful. If you find a thought process like CBT or DBT that helps you,
and you're opening it more to kind of like the clinical realm of behavioral health and things of that nature. All right.
So there is no mention of God or higher power anywhere in our literature.
All right.
We sort of just use thought process, and that includes religions. All a religion is a thought process.
Okay.
It's a mechanism that you've come up to
keep you out of trouble.
To keep you out of trouble. Really, if I'll get a little metaphysical here. all of these thought processes around belief systems are just to help you be a little happy knowing that you're gonna die. Like,
Okay.
we are all leaving the exact same way. Like,
Yeah, that's the truth.
and so that's why, anything that you can do to cope with that, that's why people, like drugs. Like having that knowledge, sometimes I wish I was just a dog and I didn't know I was gonna die. And I just smelled telephone poles and asses. And
Yeah, like the dog's life. So, what do you like? Do you have any like shout outs? Do you want to shout out your program? Any information you want to like give at the end of this?
Well,
Hold on, we got a big truck going by.
Yeah.
All right, you're good.
so, if I had a shout out, it's just really, I think, to seeing the change that is happening. I try and always keep the glass half full, and I see that, a lot more of the peer recovery and addiction is settling into an all path sort of mode.
All paths meaning like different ways for people to experience betterment, health, recovery,
Yeah.
whatever.
And one of the things that I wanted to do with SUDA, really, because I've seen all these different, like, all recovery, all paths, all these type of pop-up meetings, and there's no organization to it. So all I did was, I want to create something that's an all paths fellowship for the future.
Okay.
It's literally, to me, that's why we made that logo, the future of recovery, because I don't think the one thing that is preventing like these larger, heavily still heavily attended but very declining fellowships is that they have their traditions and they're not changing.
So you're making the doorway bigger, so more
Correct.
people can fit through.
And that's it. That's right on the sudas.org, SUDA, World Service, WS, sudas.org. It's right on that pod is right on the front page of
And
the
I'll
website.
put it and I'll link all
And
that stuff.
so that's really in on the website too. I have the 10 core principles of what they consider recovery as far as psychiatric illnesses is, and that's how I kind of view how we should have maybe been looking at addiction all along.
Looking at it as a psychiatric illness.
And in that recovery comes in all different levels.
Yeah.
And because what I do know, and this is maybe where these fellowships could open up their minds a little, is I worked on a methadone clinic for about 10 years. I ran a Suboxone clinic for a year during COVID because I wasn't getting much satisfaction doing what I was doing because they wouldn't let me go into the programs. So that really showed me that, like, I almost feel bad for NA because they've blown their leg off and they don't even know it.
They're not changing with the times, is what you're saying?
Correct. Because what I already see happening that's going to be wonderful is, and this is where NA really shortchanges itself with this clean time MAT thing and not acknowledging that people on MAT are clean, is they're trying to drive their own narrative. They want the only story of MAT to be that, oh, I came in on MAT and I knew I wasn't clean, but they taught me how to get off of it too, and now I'm clean and blah.
Yeah, which for some people might be
Which for
uncomfortable
some-
as they feel ashamed, like they don't want to share
Correct.
their story. Yeah.
Which is fine. Some people will come off medication.
Yeah.
Lots of people will come off medication. But that doesn't change the fact that I know people that own $1 million businesses that have been on methadone for 40 years.
Yeah.
Like,
And then that's their story.
that's their story. Like, and no one publishes that story. No one recognizes that story. The only people they ever go to for the Boston Globe stuff is the people that own sober houses and go to NA or AA.
Well, that's the story I want. I want the story of the successful methadone user for 40 years.
Me too. Because, you know, I'm just going to give you rough stats. So the clinic I worked in was in Boston suburb. There's 200, the census is around 250 people. And I know the fellowships will hate this one, but if you don't count weed, probably 150 to 200 of those people are absolutely just fine. You know, and
they're just out there living normal lives.
They're out there living normal lives. You know, when we do testing, most people are going to come back just methadone or methadone THC.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll see methadone benzos. You
Yeah.
know, but sometimes they're prescribed too. So,
Yeah.
you know.
So they're functioning users.
And then this is a harm reduction piece of it.
Yeah.
You know, and then there's another 50. There's sporadic use. You know, every
Yeah.
6 months they flag for fentanyl. Or,
Yeah, they're going out.
You know what I mean? Like, but they're still fine. They're not dead.
Yeah.
And there's still plenty of room for progress.
Yeah.
You know, as long as, the only thing you can't recover from is death.
So that's recovery, and I get like the point that you're trying to make is like no one group over here or there should be able to control the narrative of what recovery looks like. So,
And especially where it's now to the point of it's a minority opinion that controls the entire narrative.
all right.
You know, and they live, this is another whole interview in itself. They live in this sort of like untouchable, like even the sober housing system. How is it they don't have to abide by tenancy laws or any other sort of clinical?
All right. So yeah. So let's leave that one alone. And it's, so we've been going
anyway.
an hour. Let's
But back to
yeah.
that's all SUDA is all past recovery, slightly organized, and we gave it a name that can be used over and over again instead of, I could have called it all past, but I do believe that there's still a lot of stigma, so I do believe that anonymity.
You keyed in on the part that like some substance use causes problems. It's a disorder. It causes problems in the life.
Yeah.
And like that's what I like, and like that's why I came to you first, because I like people that are creative. I like people that try to upset the system. They see the problems. You're obviously aware. So like this is the last thing I'm going to ask. This is the last question. What advice do you have to give to people out there that might be struggling like with addiction or mental illness, or the homeless people that I'm going to be encountering? What advice do you have?
That as long as you're not dead, your life can improve, and there is help out there, if you're willing to take it. And and no matter what vehicle you use, try and be yourself and find what's going to work for you and not what's going to work for someone else.
Drive authentic is what you're saying.
Yes.
Drive authentic. All right, Sean, thank you so much. It's a good hour interview, man. I'm so excited to learn and see the development of SUDA.
I try to keep it concise, but
I know.
I'm not that guy.
Well, I'm going to shake your hand, my friend.
We'll have the